So with that, I think I am going to turn things over to Bruce. We'll have him unmute.
Okay, here I am. Am I there?
Yeah, you sound good, Bruce. Take it away.
Okay, Bruce Carney with Carney Family Farms. I guess I just, first off, just like to say thank you to everyone that's joined. Hopefully we can make this hour worth your time. A little bit about Carney Family Farms. We come back out here to the farm, Connie and I, when in 1996. So we've been here for a little while. When we came, the farm was 200 acres of row crop. It's 300-acre farm total. There was 200 acres of row crop and 100 acres of permanent pasture with some cattle. And we grew corn and beans for a while, but eventually turned it all over to 100% grass finished operation. Today we finished grass-fed beef, pasture pork, lamb, and some poultry. So we kind of dabble in everything, and just about all of the family, my kids are all involved in one way or another. My daughter does most of the marketing on the farm today. Not most, pretty much all of the marketing on the farm today. So without her, we wouldn't be probably doing much direct marketing. But anyway, let's get to the program. So a little bit, I've used CRP on this farm. I've used CSP on this farm. We've used EQIP. I've used state programs for tree plantings and seeding and stuff like that. So I've used a lot of different programs. I guess probably the biggest thing was when I was transitioning from row crop to pasture, I used EQIP and CSP both. Put all my cricks and a buffer strip along the cricks that go through the farm into CRP for 15 years. And they also helped then do a lot of the fencing and the water systems and everything I needed to divide the rest of the farm up into a rotational grazing system that we had. So we had to get a water system out to 400 or 300 acres on the farm. And at the same time, they were wanting me to fence the livestock out of the creek. So those two things kind of went together. Okay, we'll give you some money for a water system, but you have to keep your cows out of the creek. And so all I have access into my creeks are in just certain locations with heavy use areas. So, and then I've been in CSP. I'm signing up right now this year for my third sign up into CSP. The original one was probably the hardest one to sign up. Lots of paperwork. It took a long time, as I remember, to do that. But so, and then just over the years, we've used miscellaneous state programs for tree plantings and EQIP. I've used EQIP quite a bit. At the same time, used EQIP when we was doing all the rotational grazing. So setting that up. So between those two, EQIP and CRP, that's pretty much how I got the farm set up to a grazing operation. Enough said there. Better let Chad talk, and then we'll get on with some questions.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. Before we let Chad introduce himself, Karen made a comment in the chat that they have not heard of CSP or EQIP. I just want to make a note. It's really hard to talk about these programs without getting into a big pot of acronym soup. So I will do my best to explain some of those acronyms. I typed that out in the chat there, but CRP is the Conservation Reserve Program. CSP is the Conservation Stewardship Program. EQIP is the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. And all CSP and EQIP are both programs run through the Natural Resources Conservation Service for working lands conservation. CRP is run kind of jointly with Farm Service Agency and the Natural Resources Conservation Service. So I'll provide maybe a little bit of background about those after Chad introduces himself, but I want to let him introduce himself and talk about their farm a little bit.
Thanks. I'm honored to be on here with Bruce, who's in the Stockman Grass Farmer this month. Props on that. So we rent 120 acres. Most of that is in pasture. Some of it is in CRP. We have 1 acre of produce and cut flowers that we do. And we've been farming for 7 years. We used EQIP to purchase or help purchase one of our hoop houses. It was a 20 by 120, and we got just shy of like 9,000 for that or so. We do CSP and Conservation Stewardship Program. There's not a lot of people around that do that because you have to enlist your whole farm. And so it's kind of a bit of a deal breaker for some people. And we've also gotten 2 microloans, one for getting when we were starting out with the produce, and then one we were getting ramped up with the cattle, and through the FSA. And we also got our house loan through the FSA. But I don't think we'll focus on those programs so much today. We've also done EQIP to put in, we'll be putting in water, fence, etc. in another rented farm this coming year. So I like CSP because it pays you for what you're doing right, and pay you more to improve, whereas CRP is, the concept has kind of been, you do something wrong, you till it, or you run the ground, it's not producing, and then they pay you to do nothing. So I like the concept, the basic logical concept of CSP more than CRP, generally speaking. And let's see, when you're thinking about doing these programs, an important thing is that you've got to be willing to take on the NRCS as a business partner. You're going to want to do things a certain way. As farmers, we all have, ways that we think things should be done. And they're going to say, no, you can't do it that way. No, Bruce, you can't graze those creeks, and you've got to be willing to meet them and, and go along with what they're saying. And the paperwork, a lot of it is just communication with the office, your local office. It is a hoop, and it's, not fun, but it's not so bad that it wasn't worth, joining the programs and going through that process. So it's not a fun part, but it's definitely, I found it worth it to go through that process.
Thanks, Chad. So I will do my best here really briefly to summarize these 3 programs that we've been talking about the most. So the Conservation Reserve Program is a land rental payment program. So that is going to be a yearly payment from the federal government, usually to convert cropland into some sort of perennial cover. And CRP is a pretty broad program. It covers many different types of activities, from taking whole fields out of production and planting it to natives, to just field borders or prairie strips or things like that. So we can talk maybe a little bit more about that. And some of you may have experience that you can share. The Conservation Stewardship Program, Chad alluded to this already, but it is really a whole farm program. So you enroll your whole farm and it pays you an annual payment based on a system of conservation that you either have implemented or are implementing across your farm. And it kind of also pays extra. Oh, having trouble hearing me. Is that better? Can I get a thumbs up? That's better. Okay. Sorry, Mark. Thanks for making a note there. CSP is a whole farm program. So you enroll your whole farm into that program, and it pays you a yearly payment based on kind of a system of conservation practices and enhancements that you're implementing. And then EQIP is kind of it's a cost share program as well, but it pays more for single practices or single activities that you might implement. EQIP contracts can only be 5 years long, so you might have a 5-year contract to do cover crops. Typically, they're more like 3 years, or just one-off payments for something like water infrastructure, fence infrastructure, things like that. So I want to ask a question here for Chad and Bruce and get their thoughts. And then I really want to open it up to you all. So feel free to type those questions into the chat, or I will invite you all in just a minute to unmute. So be ready to unmute and ask your question. And hopefully we won't have 5 people trying to talk over each other, but we can cross that bridge when we get there. So, I mean, Bruce and Chad, you both alluded, to the fact that if you are involved in these programs, it's really then a partnership with the NRCS, and you both alluded kind of to this this paperwork that you have to do. You know, what motivated you to kind of jump through those hoops and sign up for those programs? Like, was it a financial decision? Was it the technical assistance? What was kind of your initial motivation for searching out some of those programs? I guess we can start with Chad, maybe.
Yeah, thanks. So it was kind of just a ways to help make ends meet on the farm. And, you know, somebody is going to give you a pat on the back for, you know, like CSP for doing something that you're doing well, you know, all the better. You know, if Uncle Sam is giving out money, I'll hesitantly, you know, I contemplated heavily how involved I want to be in taking money from the government, but I guess I'll take my cut with a twang in my mouth, but it does help and make ends meet with farming and getting things started, you know, and Bruce kind of alluded to that too. For example, the farm that this new farm that I'm renting, you know, it hadn't been maintained for a long time, and it was recently put into organic row crop, and then I rented it we've seeded it down into pasture, and you know, I've gotten hay off it a couple of years, but I really want to be able to graze on it. And so the EQIP programs that I'm doing, and you know, doing some interior fencing, we're going to put in some solar well and fence charger, and you know, those kinds of programs. We put in a pond, so it really helps. I would say it's helped me more financially than having them help me plan it out. I kind of feel like, you know, in the field days that I've gone to, the interest that I've taken in other farmers, you know, just going to like Bruce's farm and Paul Ackley's farm and some other people around, you know, and learning how they do rotational grazing, I've picked up a lot more information than what I would get from my local Nrcs office. And so, you know, there was some conflicts, you know, in how we do things and, you know, what their expectations are. For example, we did a tree planting in the CSP program at my dad's farm. And, you know, it paid really well, but I also cannot graze on those acres for 5 years. And so, you know, it is a give and take. And so I'm not making any grazing income. I'm not getting that grass into my cattle. But, you know, it did pay fairly well, and we're going to have some trees planted. And so it's a give and take. And, you know, it's an adventure, but well worth it.
Thanks, Chad. Bruce, do you want to speak a little bit to what initially motivated you to sign up for these programs? And can I just get one more thumbs up? I don't know, is this better to hear me? Okay, good. I changed my mic here. So, all right, Bruce, take it away.
Well, I think, I guess for me, the biggest thing was to go, if it was financial really, to go and put a rotational grazing system on 300 acres. It's fencing, it's quite a bit of fencing, it's a water system, it's everything. So I don't know, when I originally went in to do that I was thinking about putting my cricks all in CRP. That was kind of some pushback from them saying, well, we'll help you out and we'll do all this stuff and we can get more money by using this program and doing this or whatever, you know. So I think, but just what Chad said, I mean, I put my cricks in CRP, I put them in for 15 years. So I couldn't graze any of the buffers and get in any of them for 15 years. They just come out in 2017, I think. So, but I didn't put them back in, and now I manage them and I graze them, you know, once or twice a year in the dry season, and, you know, don't abuse them. And I think some use is better than no use. But anyway, between the CSP, I mean, they put a lot of money in for fence. And I can remember one of probably the harder conversations and part about working with the government is, you got to come together and mesh these things together, because your ideas probably aren't going to line up with exactly what their ideas are. And the one thing I can remember that we really had a hard time with was they wanted me out of the creek 100%, nowhere. You can't get in it. And I said, well, number one, the creek splits my farm in half and I have to be able to go across it. So I said, you're going to give me channels to go across the creek, heavy use areas, you call them whatever you want, but I'm going to cross that creek in a number of places. And I said, I understand that you're going to give me a water system, which is off the well at my house is what it is. But pumps break down, wells break down. I said, if I need to go to that creek for water, I'm going to go to that creek for water. So that crossing is actually my emergency water source as well. And I said, if you don't want to give me that strip across that creek and it give me access to that creek in that area, I don't want to put any of it in CRP. So we kind of went back and forth a little bit and come to the conclusion that, well, okay, we can give you 2 or 3 spots where you can cross the creek, and if you need to use them, okay. And we rocked them and made them heavy use areas so they didn't erode them and didn't tear them up, and spent some money on them. But so just to get the system to mesh together, like I was talking about, is I think the hardest part, and the part that people struggle with the most, is that what they want you to do isn't exactly what you want to do. But I think through conversations, you can figure out how to come together and make them work for yourself. And I think just gaining the conservation aspect of what you're wanting to do. I mean, it's a financial thing, but you're benefiting for that for the rest of your lifetime on your farm, really. My creeks aren't CRP anymore, but all the fences that were there that separated the cows and kept them out of the creek all the time are still there. And they're not going to go away. They're going to stay there because of the way I manage it. So even after the process, it's still beneficial. And I can think back to the first thing I did when I come out here to the farm. I think it was 2 or 3 years after we was here. So it was late 90s or early 2000s that we did a tree planting, and a 4-H group and us planted 5,000 trees and shrubs up and down a couple of the creeks up here close to the house on the banks, and they're steep banks. So it was all hand planting. We did it all by hand. And all that was lined up, and it was through I can't remember if it was through EQIP or a state tree planting program or what it was, but it was all lined up to pay for. All I had to do is turn the receipts in, and I just couldn't make myself do it. I didn't want to be part of the government. So we ended up paying for it all ourselves and didn't put it in. Any of the programs didn't take their money. So it took me a little while to get to the point where I was comfortable with signing that contract with the government. It's not something, I mean, it's when they lay down a contract with 10 pages in it and they say, sign this, it makes you think, so it's difficult. It's not something, I mean, you got to be on board with it and understand that you're signing a contract and you got to do something for so many years.
Yeah. Thanks, Bruce. Karen has a couple questions here about CSP. Karen, do you want to unmute and maybe ask those questions? And then I know that one of your questions relates to CSP and row crops. And so I want to open it up to anyone on the roundtable here who may have experience with the Conservation Stewardship Program on a row crop operation. But
okay, so our story, we're landowners. We have different pieces of land, different versions of what we're renting. But my mother, and also the timing last year, we don't have any cover crops in place. Okay, we have one operator that said that it wasn't tilling, it was called, I'm sorry, something else that goes like this. Chisel plowing was supposed to be better, but we've heard cover crops. I've watched Kiss the Ground, where you're supposed to have roots in, and ideally different roots. Okay, I get it. But it's just a matter of how do you stop that cover crop? Roller crimpers aren't easy to find maybe in Iowa, and then it might not be good, and it might only work with rye, and that's a monoculture. And so we keep going in circles about this. And then what is CSP? Okay, and if it's the whole farm, well, what does it mean? Is it for people like us with row crops, or is it only relevant to pasture animals, or what's going on here? Okay, these are our questions, very basic.
yeah, so I can say, very broadly that CSP is really kind of for all types of farms, including non-industrial private forest land. So you can actually have, non-industrial timber, and you can have CRP contracts to manage, or CSP contracts to manage that timber. So CSP is pretty broad. It covers many different types of farms and many, many, many different types of conservation activities. Does anyone in the audience maybe have experience with CSP on row crop ground for some of these kind of row crop type practices? Yeah, Jackie.
Yeah, I do, if that helps.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff, and then we'll go to Jackie.
Yeah, your CSP isn't necessarily cover crop. There's other things too. You could have no-till, manure management, nutrient management, like tissue. There's several different programs like that too. So
Yeah.
if that helps you with cover crop, with row crops and nitrogen application.
Yeah, typically, Karen, so the difference between CSP and EQIP is EQIP's going to pay you to do those things maybe once or twice or 3 times, but it's going to give you a payment for each of those practices. So it's going to give you a payment for no-till, it's going to give you a payment for cover crops, it's going to give you a payment for nutrient management. CSP is going to give you 1 payment a year for all of those different things that you might be doing.
Let me try for a second. CSP, from what I understand, when I originally signed up for CSP, and that was 20 years ago now, from what I understand, it didn't work very well with row crop. But I think the way you got to look at it is CSP is a program that pays you, and Chad said this earlier, for the conservation practices you already have in place on your farm. You've already done them. So if you have waterways, if you do no-till, if you do cover crops, if you do field borders, all these things, those all count in your CSP program and in your payment that your farm already does them, and that's the way you do business. EQIP is more of a program to get you set up for the CSP program, right? It pays you to do all these practices and get them in place, put terraces in, put waterways in, start with cover crops, do all those things, and then you kind of transfer from that over to CSP to get a payment for all those things that you've done. Now, to me, I like CSP. It's the best program there ever was because they pay for a guy that takes care of his land and does what he does. It's not like the rest of them. To me, the other one is just the opposite. You go into the office with your hand out and they lay something in it, and then you go do the practice. CSP is not like that. You've already done the practice and you go in and they lay something in your hand. To me, what they lay in your hand is the same thing, but one of them's paying you to do it. One of them, you took the initiative your own self to get out there on your land, take care of it, do what you want to do, how you want to see your farm set up, and how you want to do everything. And then they pay you for that. That's the difference. I don't think the programs cost any difference. Now they have now added to CSP that when you sign up for CSP, you have to do an enhancement on your farm, which I think really in my mind took away from that program because it was paying you for what you did. Okay. And it went back to the other way of walk in there and they don't pay you to do it. You have to use the money that you get from CSP to do that enhancement. So they don't give you money to do it. You have to do it out of the money you got out of CSP. So I don't know if that helped at all or not, but
I want to pause real quick. Karen, I see it's not Karen anymore.
It's my mother, yes.
Yes, but we will come back to you in just 1 minute. I want to let Jackie talk a little bit about CSP because she raised her hand.
Yeah, I started with I enrolled in 2009, but that was part of Obama's organic initiative because I've been certified organic 200 acres, basically, well, row crop, small grains, and so forth. But I I was already maybe doing, some things like CRP buffer strip, but I basically looked at it as, yes, enhancing, but not getting paid for things I was already doing. like interseeding red clover into one of the fields I converted to pasture, extending a field border. I put in pollinator strip. So my main point is those may just be some examples of what you can possibly do with row crop.
Thanks,
But
Jackie.
there's been an issue with interfacing with organic, but I won't get into that. Maybe a little bit.
Yeah,
All right.
Jürgen. I've been involved in row crops and CSP contracts. I'm on my third enrollment now, third sign up. Works excellent. We utilize it in our strip till system with cover crops. The biggest issue that you have with CSP is it's a whole farm so you earn points on what you do to get to a level of payment. The problem that we run into now, and being in it for almost 20 years now, is to get practices to continue to go towards our points. And we're running out of things that we can do in addition to what we're already doing to qualify for additional points. That's one of the restrictions that I see from my side of it in my operation. But for a lot of people getting started, it worked great for me because it helped me in the transition from conventional tillage to strip till and no-till, as far as the money going towards purchase of equipment and things like that I could use in the transition. So it's an excellent program. And if you're thinking about doing any of that stuff, you've got to get in, talk to your NRCS people and get involved, because there's opportunities there for everybody.
My question is, with CRP, you get over usually $100 a year or more per acre, just to let it theoretically sit there for 10 years, although there's planting problems and mid-contract management and whatever. With CSP, I'm sure the payments vary. I'm pretty sure they vary depending on, what your farm was, what practices you have and so forth. But roughly, what can you expect to get in terms of payment for that?
Chad, you
It's
maybe
really
wanna-
difficult. I'm going to tell you right now, because it all depends on what you do and what practices and everything. I mean, you can get, thousands and thousands of dollars if you want to be involved in it heavily and from the beginning, especially. But it depends on your acres, how many, mine's in my whole operation. So my full 1,000 acres is in part of CSP, and we utilize it on everything that we do. But that makes the difference right there. But you need to start with your NRCS people and get your conservation plan and what you want to do and what's going to qualify and what will bring you to that CSP whole farm and what you can earn as a payment.
Well, you said more points, you need more points now and so forth. Do they sort of fade out? I mean, one of the descriptions was, well, they pay you for what you already do. And I think that we already do some things. So, that's fine.
Yeah, after you've been in it for so long, like for myself, now I don't qualify anymore for no-till and strip-till because I've already utilized that part of their program in my prior year's sign up for CSP. But if you haven't, they all qualify. And so you have to, when you get started, that's how you do. I'm down to the point now where my 3-way mixes for cover crops don't work anymore because I've already utilized that. So now I have to have 8-way mixes and some different things. I'm all flat, so I don't have any rotable land to enroll and that type of thing. So it's starting to limit my opportunities, but I've gotten 20 years of payments out of it already. So it's been a good program.
So does any particular process or lasts like 10 years, or how long does it last? Or is
It's a 5-year program, and then you can sign up multiple years continuing on. So
Yeah. So there's all of these programs that we're talking about, CRP, EQIP, CSP, they are competitive. And so when we talk about getting points, it's really, your application for those programs gets ranked, and how your application gets ranked for CSP in particular changes based on whether you're a new enrollee or a re-enrollee. So we're getting a little bit into the weeds on CSP here. I understand it's a very complicated program. I think, like Mark said, if you want to know more about CSP, you should feel free to reach out to me, and then we can get you connected with somebody in a local office who can talk more specifics about your farm. So there was another question. Joe asked a question here in the comments about silvopasture. So there are cost share programs specifically for silvopasture. Do either of you know about getting funds for practices like this, where tree planting and grazing livestock is part of the whole practice? And so I know, Bruce, you have, I think, a little bit of experience with this. Chad, can you speak to this at all, or should we go to Bruce?
I'll speak to my experience briefly.
Yeah.
Because that is my long-term goal for the farms that I rent, is to graze and have a silvopasture system. But my people, in the office, who were good people and, got along fine with, still do, but they were in a mindset still of where you plant, you can't graze. And it was just, they were just real set in that. That kind of went along with another point I was going to make. Like, I had the idea to, drill in a cover crop in the pasture where on the ridges where it's real thin, and I'm not getting any grass production out of there. And I said, well, what about this idea? And they said, oh no, you can't plant in the pasture. And it's there. So there's things that, you might have an idea and you think you want to give it a try, and they'll say, oh no, you can't do that, because they, it's backed by some good intentions, but they're not as forward thinking as you might be sometimes. And so my experience, and I hope Bruce might have a different answer for us, but silvopasture, in my experience with CSP, was that they weren't, there yet. What was your experience, Bruce?
Well, I've planted a lot of trees and shrubs and different things around the farm. So as far as silvopasture, I have never done anything with the NRCS or any of them or any of the programs specifically with silvopasture. I'd like to go there and plant some more trees out in my pasture, but all I've really done is done tree plantings in specific areas. I mean, if you take row crop out of production, there's no trees on it. You've got to have windbreaks for trees. So that's kind of how I looked at it until I got more into the, hearing about silvopasture and talking about it. But I know they have come a long ways in the past 5 years on silvopasture and livestock in timbers. As long as you're not looking at it just to graze livestock in a timber, then that's okay. It's a system. It's a system of, you got three components that you got to, and they all have to work together. So you've got to look at the livestock piece. You've got to be able to grow trees, and you got to be able to grow forage underneath them. So it's a high management system that you're getting into, but, and it is out there. It is a practice, I believe, in EQIP to install silvopasture, where you would plant trees, the seeding, all the components of a silvopasture are in that one practice. So I know it's there. I haven't specifically used it.
Yeah.
I guess my plan is, I use the CSP tree planting, for wildlife, and it paid well for the 3 acres that I did it. And so it covered the rent, I'm still paying rent on that. And so it covered those years of rent that I won't be able to graze. But then once, I take it out of the program, I'll still be able to, then I can set up my silvo grazing system in that space. So you got to kind of keep that in mind. One point I wanted to make that we have it, just a thought for some people like myself that are on smaller acreages. There's some things that you can do that, like the tree planting, pollinator plantings, that even if you're on 10 acres, it's probably worth checking out, going to your local office and looking at doing some of the practices and just participating, if you're willing to, take them on as a partner. It's worth your time.
So I want to just make a note that we've kind of alluded to this, but all these conservation programs are based around like very discrete practices. And so those practices are pretty well defined by the agencies that run them, and the things that you want to do may or may not fit entirely within one or more of those practices. And so, I mean, Chad and Bruce have both talked about some of the back and forth and negotiation and compromise that has to happen there. But So when we talk about practices, we're actually talking about very discretely defined practices that all have their own, codes and numerical codes, and navigating that can get kind of burdensome. Joe, you also made a really good point in the chat. I don't know, do you want to unmute and share that point with the group?
About the varying knowledge between counties. That's what I have found. I talk a lot with landowners all across the state, and I work through a USDA grant promoting things like silvopasture. So it seems like silvopasture is known, but a lot of the field offices, the technical service providers may realize it, and you can go in there and say like, no, I know please look this up. You have to ask them questions literally and like say, please talk to your boss about this because it is out there. And yeah, just go into your office and after, hearing talks like this with the language to use and stuff and knowing what you're talking about, you can get some information if you ask questions. So.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point for things, not just silvopasture too. I mean, I think the knowledge for a lot of these kind of more innovative things and for grazing in general really varies from office to office, and the staff in those offices. Andrew made a good comment here. Things with these programs change pretty frequently and staff can be overwhelmed. So like Joe said, you may need to, gently nudge them to do some more research. Chad
This
looks like he has
is a printout that I got from my office, a few years ago, and this gives you an idea. This is one of 34 pages of the different practices in CSP. And so to expect your local office guy that's doing a ton of paperwork and going out and looking at all these different farms and talking with farmers who don't really want to be talking, there's a lot going on there, and to expect them to know 34 pages of inside and out for a certain program is asking a lot, to be fair. But they do have they get told one thing at a seminar a couple years ago, and that's what they know to be the facts, and then maybe the programs change a little bit, and it's a lot to keep up with for them. But it is good. I see Andrew made a comment there that go online, take the time to navigate those cumbersome government websites. You can never find exactly what you're looking for. I'm not that tech savvy, but it is frustrating. But go online and familiarize yourself with those programs and what you might be interested in. And, then go in understanding that, the Nrcs office covers a lot of territory and, has their, dealings with a lot of different programs too. So,
yeah.
I've rent pasture in multiple counties, and CSP, you put all your rented ground, everything in the program at the same time. And I've had trouble just going from one county to another, and I've done the practice in one county and the other county doesn't know anything about it. And I've multiple times had people call me and say, hey, you said this, in a talk that you did or something somewhere that you did this, but my county office says I can't do it. They don't do that. And many times I've just had them told people, have your county office call my county, Polk County, and ask Paul Miller how he did it, because he did it. It's there. So he felt good about putting it in the program and it was all right. So I've had many people just call a different county, a district, and talk to them about what they did with me so that they could figure out how to do it in theirs. And I've had him do the same thing just on my own ground in my rented pastures that, they're telling me down there, I can't do this. You did it. How do I, and he'll call and talk to them and figure out how they can do it. There's a lot there to go through. Just like Chad said, there's a lot there.
Yeah. So Mike asked a question. Mike Henning asked a question here in the chat. Is CSP handled through NRCS offices too? Yes, it is. So that is your place to start. Andrew, I will get to your question in just a minute. I'm going to out Andrew a little bit. Andrew D'Alessandro here is in the chat, and he made a comment in the chat box, but Andrew works for Fish and Wildlife Service, and a lot of what they do is provide technical assistance and help farmers navigate some of these programs. So I just wonder, Andrew, if you can talk a little bit about the importance of finding the right people to talk to. So for instance, if you're interested in wildlife practices, maybe you need to be talking to a farm bill biologist or a private lands biologist rather than, you know, your district conservationist.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You know, kind of what you know, Joe said, and Chad, some of these others have mentioned, it really behooves you to do your homework on the front end. And also to, like you said, Jorgen, to make connections. You know, we as technical providers, you know, whether it's federal, NGO, or state, you know, we have pretty extensive knowledge of every other program that's out there. So it really behooves you to see what folks offer and what they bring to the table, and call around, reach around, do your homework, because you know, when we go out and meet with a producer or a landowner, you know, we're not just thinking about the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program, which is the wildlife program through Fish and Wildlife Service, but we're also thinking about, you know, farm bill programs. We're also thinking about, you know, what programs from the state would apply, other grant opportunities from NGOs. So really, that was kind of the intent with that program, is really do your homework on the front end and see what else is available. You know, perhaps, Jorgen, it would be a good idea to send the link that Adam Janke put together from Iowa State. You just go and you click on your county, and it's going to bring up on that county all the natural resources conservation professionals that are available to you, and with contact information. That is a good place to start. But again, I think it just highlights the importance of ask around, get multiple opinions about what can happen, because a lot of those folks are going to bring their knowledge and other programs to the table to kind of build a portfolio for what you're doing to help you reach your goals.
Yeah, Bruce, I've heard you say this before, and I think Jeff, I've heard you say this before too, but just keep asking different people till you find the answer you're looking for, more or less, right? Or keep asking different people till you find the person who understands what you want and maybe need, at the very least.
Now you just keep asking them until you find the one you like.
Yeah, right.
Squeaky wheels do get the grease.
I will try and pull that. It's a technical assistance finder for your county. I will try and pull that and put it in the chat here in just a minute. I see that Joe pasted a link to the electronic field office technical guide, where you can find all the NRCS documentation and practice standards. That can be a great resource. I will tell you, as someone who has spent way too much time in that electronic field office technical guide, that it can be pretty overwhelming. So I would enter that at your own risk.
It's very overwhelming. And going back to what we were saying earlier, there's so many practices, as you'll see. You'll just keep scrolling down, and there's just so many practices that these offices have to deal with. And I think it's a good idea to go into the office knowing which specific practices to ask about and how they work and what the practice standards are. But yeah, that it's a very technical site.
So Andrea asked a question about how long has it taken folks to plan the initial application for CSP. So Chad and Bruce, I don't know if you could talk a little bit about maybe your application processes for CSP versus EQIP. If you remember what that timeline and what that process looked like. And we'll start maybe with Bruce.
Well, I'm going through it right now, and the application is, as I remember, it's 1 or 2 pages. You fill out an application, sign it, give it to them, and then if you've already been in CSP, it's not that big a deal, because they've got all the homework done right there. They know what you do and what your practices are. The only thing you really have to choose from that point then is what your upgrade is going to be, or your new practice that you have to do. So it was really pretty simple this year. I'm going through it right now, and it's really in their hands to do it and get it done and get it out to you. So it's not hard at all. Now I will say, when I went back, if I take you back to the original one, I think there was 25 pages they handed me, and they said, fill all this out and then give it back to us. And it was hugely cumbersome. And, but I know that that whole thing has all changed and everything. So I think for the initial sign up now, it would probably be a lot simpler, but I don't know that for sure because all I've done is re-enrolled into the new CSP or security program the way it is today. So
Mhm.
I'm not sure if I can answer it.
Chad, do you want to take a stab?
I'm really good at, forgetting bad experiences.
That's a survival skill.
I'm not.
So I would say it seems like it was, it took some time to go, from the time when you go into the office and, to the time where you're actually start implementing practices. I know with my hoop house, just remembering back to that EQIP, I would have had it built before they would have even had it approved. And so they were slower moving at the office than I was to get things done. But it was worth going at their pace with that project. For the CSP, yeah, I think there was a lot to it in identifying which practices were the best option, the add-ons, I guess, whatever their term is. And so it was sitting down and going through these documents of 34 pages and ask, well, what about this one? What about this one? Where could we do this? And so it's kind of, a lot to figure out. And, they're figuring that out with several farms, that are in your county. So you got to keep that in mind too. But I would say it seems like it was a few months timeline wise for the different programs from when you go in and talk to them till when you actually start doing something or start getting a payment or that kind of thing. It was, it's a government bureaucracy and it takes time. So there's not much you can do about that. Like, for example, here's an example, we had a water go down at Dad's farm and, he said, well, what about, seeing if Nrcs is an option to get. I was like, it's gonna, but we don't have a year to, we can fill out an application, but it could be forever until we actually can do something with them about that, situation like that. So if you're thinking about implementing something this spring with a, Nrcs program, it's probably not going to happen. If you're thinking about implementing something next year, in 22, then you're about on the right pace to work with the government.
Yeah, I would say that's fair. I should point out that so EQIP and CSP, you can submit an application anytime. You can work with your office anytime, but they only batch and award contracts at certain times throughout the year. So there's actually a CSP batching date coming up February 19th. And so those CSP contracts will then start in 2022, really. So if that's something you're interested in, you really need to, for next year, you probably need to contact your local office as soon as possible. And the EQIP date was actually in December, and then there will probably be another one this spring or early summer. So EQIP is a little more flexible. CSP, there's usually just one a year. And then we are CRP. There's a couple different types of CRP. There's general CRP, which is larger tracts of land. Those signups happen more infrequently, and there's actually a general CRP signup happening right now. And so if CRP is something you're interested in for things beyond just like field borders and buffers and streams, the general CRP signup is open. And then you can apply for what's called continuous CRP, which pays for things like borders and prairie strips and buffers anytime. Vicky asked a question a little while ago, and I kind of skipped over it. I'm sorry. Let me find it again. Sounds like CSP would be a perfect program for transitioning from CRP to regen ag with conservation practices. Yeah, Vicky, I think I'd be interested to see if anyone has experiences with something like that. CSP could be a fit. Again, the programs are competitive. And so the challenge you might have is that a lot of those rankings are based on the amount of resource concerns that you're addressing. And so because it's been on CRP, you may not actually have those resource concerns. Kind of counterintuitive. CSP would be one that could theoretically compensate you for the conservation you've already been doing. But I don't know if anyone has any experiences taking land out of CRP and enrolling it into something else.
You could use that new initiative they just put together for EQIP where they joined all the soil health initiative. What was it called on our committee? Jordan, where they use no-till and nutrient management and different cover crops and.
Yeah. So like we alluded to earlier, the programs are always changing, and one of the things they're trying with EQIP now is actually bundling certain practices. If you do, 4 or 5 different practices in a system, then you receive maybe a higher payment rate. So that could be something to ask your local offices too. Mark asked, if all land is already in EQIP, can you still look at CSP? I would say yes. And again, if anyone has, experiences or information about this to share, feel free to do so. You just can't double dip. You can't overlap. You can't get paid from EQIP and CSP for the same types of practices. But yes, you can.
So if you're,
go ahead, Bruce.
If you're doing a practice in EQIP right now this year, you're not going to get paid for CSP for that practice because you're getting paid for it in EQIP to put it in place. So that's double dipping, right?
Yeah.
I will say my person that I worked with on the new farm on the EQIP programs, his point was the way he liked to do it was get things, the major improvements done with EQIP, and then sign the farm up into CSP, for that continued coverage and additional programs, like a tree planting or something like that. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is again getting in the weeds, but typically EQIP pays a little better for structural things. So like tree planting, like the initial installation of a buffer or a border or fence or water. EQIP typically pays a little better for those things than CSP might. And so you might use EQIP to pay for some of those things and CSP to pay for some of the more ongoing management type activities. But we have about 4 minutes. Andrew made a comment here, CRP sign up open until February 12th. Jackie made a comment around a 1-year process for me for CSP and EQIP.
One thing I had in my notes.
Yeah, go ahead, Chad.
That we hadn't mentioned, and I don't know if other people have had this experience as well. They're always very clear with me of, we make a plan that this is an estimate. That it's, if they say you're going to get $16,935, it's an estimate, and in my experience, those estimates are always higher than the actual payout. I can't tell you why, but just something for you all to keep in mind when you're doing these programs is, know that you're going to be doing it at, mostly out of your pocket. And then once you get it done, you submit it, especially with EQIP, and, then you get paid for the work that you've done. CSP is an annual payment, but what you sign up for and the dollar amount that you actually get for doing that varies. And I don't know why, but it does. So just a heads up when you're going into these programs on that. Could cause some frustrations.
Bruce, any last minute thoughts?
Well, no, not specifically. I just, don't give up. It takes some time, and go in there, and if it doesn't work the first time, just kind of work back and forth and talk to them and see what they suggest, and go home and think about it and think about what they said and how that might work with you, because they're pretty strict on what their programs do. But somehow I've always been able to get to a medium ground to where we go ahead and do something, and it's worth it financially, and it's worth the conservation practice I put in out here, or the fence I put in, or the water system I put in, whatever it is. So I know I've had a number of people say, I called my NRCS, they called me and said, I just can't get this out of them. And it's like, well, just take your time and go in there because it will, they just give up, you know? And I think the other thing, I think the bundle approach that they're looking at that we talked about, I think you need to look at the big picture of your farm and where do you want to go and what you want to do. And from what my perspective, I think that it works better if you go in there with a big plan and do a lot of things and do it all at once than it is if you try to go in there, because once you use a program, they won't let you use it again. So if you go in there for a little bit and put a little bit of a water system in, they won't let you use that water system piece again. Unless it's on a different farm, then they might, but you can't piecemeal it too much and really get the benefit out of the program. Look at your whole farm plan and see what you want to do.
Great, thanks, Bruce. Well, we are at 12:10, so that is the end of our hour here. I want to thank Chad and Bruce for kind of playing host and answering some questions, but I also want to thank everyone for your questions and everyone who kind of submitted some feedback. So we kind of hopped around the conversation. I hope it was useful. These are complicated programs and a complicated process, and hopefully maybe it sparks some inspiration for some people. I'm seeing some thumbs up, so that's a good sign.